Hello viewers, welcome to techmystyle. Myself Anand and I'm here with another exciting video. You might have noticed from my past PC builds that I'm a huge fan of small form factor PCs. While I was browsing AliExpress recently, this ITX case caught my attention. It looked a lot like Velka 3 without a hefty price tag. The marketing material shows it's capable of holding a half-length graphic card, so technically you could build a super small gaming PC that you can comfortably carry around. I'm immediately sold on the idea. Given that I don't have access to my other gaming machine, I thought I'll give it a try. I have ordered the case and waited impatiently. I didn't want to order any other parts until I see the case and feel comfortable with the quality. All looked well after I received and examined the case. I will walk you through the parts I selected for this build and give you a first-person view at the build. I said first person because I shot this video on GoPro Hero 8. Due to the pandemic and temporary remote work, I'm in a place without access to my gadgets. I tried my best not to make this nauseatic. Hope you'll enjoy it. Let's dive right in. First up, this is the case we are dealing with. As I mentioned before, I got this from AliExpress and I paid like $72 including shipping to USA. This ITX case is made out of aluminum, so it looks and feels very solid. This case can accommodate a dual slot graphic cards up to 180mm in length, two 2.5-inch SSDs, a 170mm ITX motherboard and Flex 1U power supply, all in a 4.3 liter volume. Please note that there are no USB ports and the power switch goes on the back. There's no case fan support as well. Let's park the processor and talk about graphic card next. I set a $200 budget and started looking for half-length graphic cards. After a good amount of research, I went with GTX 1650 Super for its affordable price, 150mm length, 4GB of VRAM and slightly higher passmark score than RX 580, and all of this at only 100W TDP. I picked the Zotac version for its dual fan and 90° power connector. This works great for K39 like case as the power supply goes at the bottom of the case. You need a special cable called PCIe riser cable like this one to install graphic card in a case like this. I got this EZDIY riser cable from Amazon for $22. You would require a 25cm cable and make sure 25cm is just the cable length, not from edge to edge, which includes male and female sockets. I should have gone with the one that seller of the case sells. I couldn't find any cable that fits for the mounting holes on this case. I had to cut the PCB at the left hole to put a screw. Power supply. This particular form factor is what made this case possible. You must put a Flex 1U power supply in this case. Flex power supplies are designed for slim server rack PCs but later were adapted into HD PCs and gaming PCs. Make sure you have enough and the right power connectors when buying one. I went with Silverstone FX350, which is a 350W power supply with 24-pin for the motherboard, 8-pin CPU and 6-pin PCIe connectors. It works perfectly for this build. If you can spare extra cash, please go with a modular one. I got this one for $93 from Amazon. Finally, the processor. I'm using Ryzen 3 3200G, which is a 3.6 GHz quad-core 4-thread processor at 65W TDP. I got this for $97 from Micro Center. I went with a Ryzen 5 processor for my previous build as I wanted to do some productivity stuff. This one I'm dedicating to gaming. A dual-core processor like Athlon should have been good enough, but right there in the middle. It comes with a cooler in the box, so that's cool. I'm using a Gigabyte B450i Aorus Pro Wi-Fi ITX motherboard for this build. It might sound strange to use the 450 series motherboard in late 2020. However, this is a very reliable motherboard and with 450 chipset supporting Ryzen 5000 series processor, there is an upgrade path as well. This has a 2 DDR4 memory slots that support up to 3200 MHz clock speeds, onboard dual band Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5, M.2 NVMe SSD slot and 2 RGB LED controller headers. I got this one for $119 from Amazon. And to wrap up the parts, we have a 16GB Corsair Vengence RGB Pro 3200 MHz for the memory. With this, we can take advantage of the higher memory clock speeds that Ryzen 3200G and B450i offer. For the boot drive, we have a 512GB Adata XPG Spectrix M.2 NVMe. So yes, both of these light up. It would look cool if one of the side panels of the case swapped with an acrylic panel in future. It costed $87 for the memory and $70 for the drive, and I got this from Best Buy. Please note that I'm not adding any secondary drives in this build, though you can add up to two 2.5-inch SSDs. Now let's look at how all this fits into the tiny case. As always, start by installing the CPU. Take off the brackets around the CPU socket and pull the lever. Match the notch on the CPU with the notch on the CPU bracket and make sure it's settled well. Secure the CPU by pressing and locking the lever. Add some thermal paste and spread it evenly with a spatula and install the CPU fan. Make sure the AMD logo is pointing the opposite side of the RAM slots, otherwise you'll be completely blocking one memory slot. Connect the CPU fan to the CPU fan header and secure the cable. Install the memory and unscrew the M.2 drive heatsink. Install the NVMe drive and secure it with a screw. We won't be able to put the heatsink on top of it due to the RGB plate. This is mostly standard for all the bits. The fun starts now. Remove both side panels of the case first. You need to remove the bottom 3 screws by the power supply as well. I'm going to install the power supply first. Secure the power supply to the case and leave the back plate. Due to the extremely tight space we have here, separate the cables you need on each side up front. Like keep the motherboard and CPU power cables on the motherboard side and PCIe power cable on the graphic card side. As this one is not a modular power supply, try to hide the cables that are not required for the build. I'm tucking a Molex cable behind the power supply in my case. Unfortunately, that's all I could fit. Once everything seems right, put the screws on the back plate. Push the male end of the PCIe riser cable through the gap at the top and flip the case. We can move on to installing the motherboard now. Start by putting the I/O shield. I had to unscrew the power supply to properly place the I/O shield. One edge of the I/O shield is supposed to go between the case and the power supply. It just needed a millimeter space and it's not there. You could add the I/O shield before installing the power supply to avoid this. Now you can put the motherboard in the case by holding the CPU fan. Push it gently towards the I/O shield until you see the hole on the case and the motherboard align. Put the motherboard screws and connect the power button LED wires of the front panel to the motherboard. It's actually back panel in this case. Connect the PCIe riser cable and flip the case. Insert graphic card in the PCIe female slot of the riser cable and connect the PCIe power. When I installed the graphic card and moved on to put a screw on the I/O plate, it didn't align properly. I removed the mounting screw of the riser cable and fixed the back plate, but then I couldn't lock the card on the PCIe slot. I ended up loosening the graphic card I/O plate. After the graphic card is in place, I did some cable management for the PCIe and the SATA power cables and closed that side of the case. I finally connected the CPU power and the motherboard power cables. Managing the CPU power cable was okay, but the 24-pin power connector is way too bulky to hide it or even move out of the way to close the lid. After some struggle, I was able to bend it and adjust it in between the case and the memory sticks. Please note that I did a boot test after connecting these cables and before going with the cable management and closing the lid. I would recommend the same, as it will be very frustrating to check the connections in this tiny case later. I realized that my math was wrong when I tried putting the second side panel. The boxed cooler is a little taller for this case, like 5mm. I have decided to order a low profile cooler, probably with RGB fan for this, but wanted a way to use this meanwhile. I have added 5mm motherboard standoffs and added side panel after that. It did fit perfectly and resulted in an acceptable look. Before we look at how this PC functions and some benchmarks, let me tell you that building a gaming rig with this case is not a pleasant experience, but the end result is very rewarding. I love the form factor, the all aluminum look and the touch of RGB lighting. Before installing Windows, the only option I changed in the boot config is to overclock the memory speed. There was a profile automatically available for me to switch to 3200 MHz. The other option I made sure were if graphic output is coming through PCIe and the thumb drive is on the top of the boot order. I have created a Windows 10 bootable thumb drive using media creation tool from Microsoft. The installation went smoothly and I got all the benchmarking software and couple of games through Steam for real world tests. Let's look at how this tiny box performed. I ran disk benchmark using Crystal Disk Mark just to make sure we get what we're supposed to get from an NVMe drive, and as you can see, everything looked good. Before running the synthetic benchmark, I have installed the latest drivers from Zotac website. Though video out worked properly, Device Manager was unhappy about the PCIe device. After the driver installation, I ran the PCMark 10 benchmark to see how the machine performed overall and how it compares to scores from other similar builds. It took a while for the benchmark to complete and the final numbers looked like this. This machine scored 7146 for Essential, 5890 for Productivity and 5107 for Content Creation. The average score is 4294 and it's better than 39% of all the PCs and came close to our latest gaming laptop. Looking into the 3D Mark website for PCs with Ryzen 3 3200G and GTX 1650 Super combination, my machine ranked second thanks to the NVMe drive and higher memory clock speeds. Next up, Geekbench. Geekbench gave a single core score of 886, a multi-core score of 2655 and a 50K for the OpenCL score. I kept the hardware monitor on during the synthetic benchmark to mainly monitor the temperatures. With the lack of case fans and enough room for the airflow, I was worried the CPU and GPU running hot, but it was not that bad. And for the proper graphic benchmark, I am using Unigen Valley and I am setting the Unigen value to benchmark for 1080p ultra quality with 4x multiplier for the anti-aliasing. This should represent a good visual experience for the 1080p gaming. At 100% GPU utilization during the test, the card drew 102 watt power and became 72 degrees centigrade hot. As for the results, the Zotac GTX 1650 Super scored 2976 with an average of 71 frames per second. Moving on to the real world test, I played Counter-Strike Go with Steam's frame count enabled and got a whopping 200 frames on average with a maximum frame rate reaching 260s. I know CSGO is not a demanding one, so I tried the default benchmark provided in Rise of the Tomb Raider. Setting the graphic presets to high and running the benchmark resulted in an average frame rate of 60 and we get a minimum of 30 frames across all stages in the game. I have also tried playing some PC VR games using Oculus Link on the Quest 2. Yes, you can do VR on 1650 Super. The card is rated VR ready by Nvidia and listed in supported graphic card for Link by Oculus. The first game I tried on this card was Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. The game ran without any issues and playing experience was absolutely amazing. In fact, this is the first time I'm playing a PC VR game and I'm so glad that I got this card. I would definitely try more such games in future. The library is not very big right now. The other game I could play was Croft Manor in Rise of the Tomb Raider. This is not like Hellblade where we were able to roam freely and explore. Rather, we can use the Quest controllers to position Lara Croft character in any location. There are a lot of collectible documents and relics and you can examine some relics to uncover clues. I didn't have any trouble playing this either on this machine with 1650 Super. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for staying till the end. Please leave a comment if you want me to cover some other aspect of the machine. Hit the like button if you like this content and please show your support by subscribing to my channel.